A frail elderly woman with weathered hands reached into her purse at the grocery checkout, watching a young mother count crumpled bills with shaking fingers. What happened next would expose a secret that neither woman saw coming and change 3 generations forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of Meadowbrook Market buzzed overhead, casting their harsh glow across aisles lined with everyday necessities. It was the kind of neighborhood grocery store where everyone knew everyone, where handwritten sale signs still hung from fishing line, and where the smell of fresh bread from the bakery mixed with the faint scent of floor cleaner. Tuesday evenings were usually quiet, with only a handful of customers making their way through the narrow aisles, but tonight felt different somehow. At checkout lane 3, Sarah Chen stood frozen, her face flushed with embarrassment as she stared at the digital display. $47.32. The numbers glowed red like an accusation. In her trembling hands, she held $31 in wrinkled bills and a handful of coins she had scraped from the bottom of her purse, between car seats, and from the small jars she kept hidden behind the flour canister in her tiny apartment kitchen. Sarah was 28 years old, though the stress lines around her eyes made her appear older. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had seen better days, and her clothes, while clean, bore the subtle signs of careful mending. She worked as a live-in nanny for a wealthy family, a job that provided housing but barely enough income to support herself and send money back to her elderly parents in another state. The groceries in her cart were not luxuries. A gallon of milk, whole wheat bread, bananas that were already showing brown spots because they were cheaper, generic cereal, eggs, and a small container of yogurt. Basic sustenance for the 2 children she cared for during the long hours when their parents traveled for business. The family had been delayed on their current trip, leaving Sarah to stretch her meager grocery budget even thinner than usual. Behind the register, Marcus, a college student who had been working at Meadowbrook Market for 2 years, shifted uncomfortably. He had seen this scenario play out before, and it never got easier. His training told him to be patient, but the growing line behind Sarah was making him nervous. An elderly man holding a single newspaper tapped his foot impatiently, while a mother with 2 restless toddlers tried to keep them entertained with whispered promises of cookies if they behaved. Sarah's fingers moved through the bills again, hoping somehow the math would change. Her face burned with shame as she realized she would have to ask Marcus to remove items from her order. She glanced back at the cart, trying to decide what she could live without. The yogurt, maybe. Or the bananas. But the children loved both, and she had already been feeding them more pasta and rice than she felt comfortable with. Just as Sarah opened her mouth to speak, a gentle voice interrupted the tense silence. "Excuse me, dear?" Sarah turned to see an elderly woman standing beside her, leaning slightly on a wooden walking cane with an intricate silver handle. The woman appeared to be in her 70s, with silver hair styled in soft waves and kind blue eyes that seemed to hold decades of wisdom. She wore a simple but well-tailored navy coat and a pearl brooch that caught the light. Despite her age, there was something dignified and graceful about her presence. "I couldn't help but notice," the elderly woman continued, her voice warm and measured, "that you might be having a small difficulty. Would it be terribly presumptuous of me to offer to help with your groceries today?" Sarah's eyes widened, and she felt her cheeks burn even hotter. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly." "That's very kind, but I can just put a few things back. It's really not a problem." The elderly woman smiled gently, already reaching into her own purse. "Nonsense, dear. We all have days when things don't quite add up the way we planned. I'm Eleanor Westfield, and it would be my genuine pleasure to help a young woman who clearly cares enough to shop for quality food rather than filling a cart with junk." Before Sarah could protest further, Eleanor had handed her credit card to Marcus. "Please ring up her entire order on this card," she said with quiet authority that brooked no argument. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "Mrs. Westfield, I can't let you do this. You don't even know me." Eleanor placed a gentle hand on Sarah's arm. "Sometimes the most important kindnesses happen between strangers, dear. And please, call me Eleanor. Mrs. Westfield makes me feel ancient." Her eyes twinkled with humor as she added, "Though I suppose at 74, I am rather ancient to someone your age." As Marcus processed the payment, Eleanor studied Sarah with the keen eye of someone who had raised children and grandchildren. She noticed the careful way Sarah had selected her groceries, the obvious thought that had gone into each item. This wasn't someone who was careless with money or looking for handouts. This was a young woman doing her best in difficult circumstances. Eleanor asked conversationally as they waited for the receipt. Sarah hesitated, then shook her head. "I'm a nanny. I take care of two wonderful children, Emma and James. They're 5 and 7. Their parents travel frequently for work, so I live with the family and care for them." Something flickered across Eleanor's face at the mention of the children's names, but Sarah was too overwhelmed with gratitude to notice. "That must be quite a responsibility," Eleanor said carefully. "Living with a family, caring for their most precious possessions." "It is," Sarah agreed, accepting the grocery bags from Marcus with a grateful nod. "But I love those children like they were my own. Emma has this incredible imagination. She's always making up stories about fairy kingdoms and talking animals. And James is so smart, he asks questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? How do airplanes stay up? Where do dreams come from? Sometimes I have to look things up just to keep up with him." Eleanor's expression grew more intent. "And their parents? They travel often?" "Yes, they're both in international business. Very successful, very busy. They're actually supposed to be back tomorrow from a 3-week trip to Asia, but their flight got delayed because of weather. The children miss them terribly, but they understand that Mommy and Daddy work hard to provide for the family." As they walked toward the exit together, Eleanor seemed to be weighing something in her mind. "Sarah, dear, would you be terribly offended if an old woman asked you a rather personal question?" Sarah shifted the grocery bags in her arms. "Of course not. After what you've just done for me, you could ask me anything. What's the family's last name?" "The family you work for?" Sarah looked puzzled by the question, but answered readily. "Morrison. David and Patricia Morrison. Do you know them? They live in that big house on Elm Ridge, the one with the circular driveway and the beautiful gardens." Eleanor stopped walking so abruptly that Sarah had to backtrack a few steps. The elderly woman's face had gone pale, and she was gripping her walking cane so tightly that her knuckles were white. "Mrs. Morrison, are you all right?" Sarah asked, immediately concerned. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Eleanor took a shaky breath. "Sarah, dear, I think we need to sit down and have a conversation. There's something I need to tell you, and I'm not quite sure how to begin." They found a bench outside the grocery store, underneath a streetlight that cast a warm yellow glow in the gathering dusk. Eleanor sat heavily, suddenly looking every one of her 74 years. "Sarah," she began slowly, "David Morrison is my son." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Sarah stared at Eleanor, trying to process what she had just heard. "Your son?" "Sarah, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." "Now, back to the story," repeated. "But that would make you Emma and James's grandmother?" Eleanor nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Their grandmother who they've never met. Their grandmother who doesn't even know what they look like, what they enjoy doing, whether they're healthy and happy. Sarah felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her. "I don't understand. Why wouldn't you know your own grandchildren?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. When she spoke again, her voice was heavy with years of regret and pain. "David and I had a falling out 5 years ago, shortly after James was born. It was about money, about family expectations, about the way I thought he was prioritizing his career over his family. I said some things I shouldn't have said, and he said some things he probably shouldn't have said. We were both proud, both stubborn, both convinced we were right." She paused, watching a young father push his daughter on a swing in the small park across the street. "I told him that he was making the same mistakes his father had made, always chasing the next business deal, the next opportunity, never being present for the people who mattered most. David accused me of being manipulative, of trying to control his life the way I had tried to control his father's." Sarah listened in stunned silence as Eleanor continued. "The argument escalated, and things were said that couldn't be taken back. David told me that if I couldn't respect his choices and his wife's choices, then perhaps it would be better if we had some distance. I told him that if he wanted to choose money over family, then he could do it without my blessing or my interference. Eleanor's voice broke slightly. I never meant for the distance to become permanent. I kept thinking one of us would reach out, that pride would give way to love. But months turned into years, and the silence between us grew louder and more painful. I've missed so much, Sarah. First steps, first words, birthdays, Christmas mornings. I've missed watching my grandchildren grow up. Sarah felt tears rolling down her own cheeks. But Mrs. Morrison, Eleanor, they talk about you sometimes. Emma especially. She's seen photos of you in David's study, and she asks questions about her daddy's mommy. They know they have another grandmother, they just don't understand why they've never met you. This revelation seemed to hit Eleanor like a physical blow. They ask about me. Emma found a picture of David as a little boy, and she noticed he looked like James. When I explained that it was their daddy when he was young, she asked who was the lady holding him in the picture. David got very quiet and just said it was his mother, their other grandmother, but that grown-ups sometimes had complicated relationships. Eleanor covered her face with her hands. I've been such a fool, Sarah, such a stubborn, prideful fool. While I've been nursing my wounded feelings and waiting for David to make the first move, my grandchildren have been growing up without me. They've been learning to walk and talk and think and dream, and I've missed all of it because I was too proud to pick up a phone. Sarah reached over and gently touched Eleanor's arm. It's not too late, she said softly. They're still young, still eager to love and be loved. James asks about everything, and Emma has enough imagination to fill any gaps in the story. They would be thrilled to have another grandmother, another person to love them. Eleanor looked up, hope and fear warring in her eyes. Do you really think so? After all this time, do you think David would even consider letting me back into their lives? Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking about her employers and the family dynamics she had observed over the past 2 years of working for them. I think David and Patricia are good people who love their children deeply, she said finally. But I also think they're so focused on providing financial security for Emma and James that they sometimes forget children need more than money and nice things. They need family, they need stories about where they came from, they need to know they're part of something bigger than just their immediate household. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I think David might be just as stubborn and proud as you are, Eleanor, but I also think he might be just as tired of the silence. Sometimes it takes someone from the outside to help people see what's really important. Eleanor straightened up, a look of determination replacing the despair on her face. Sarah, dear, would you be willing to help me? Would you consider being a bridge between my son's family and me? I don't want to overstep any boundaries, and I certainly don't want to put you in an uncomfortable position with your employers. But maybe there's a way to start small, to begin rebuilding what was broken. Sarah felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. She genuinely cared about the Morrison family, and she had often wished that Emma and James had more extended family in their lives. David and Patricia were loving parents, but their work schedules meant they were often absent, leaving Sarah to handle not just childcare but also the emotional needs of 2 children who sometimes seemed lonely despite all their material advantages. I think I would like to help, Sarah said carefully, but we would need to be thoughtful about how we approach this. The children's well-being has to come first, and I can't do anything that would jeopardize my job or their sense of security. Eleanor nodded eagerly. Of course. We'll take it slowly, carefully. Maybe we could start with something small, something that wouldn't seem threatening or overwhelming. As they sat together on the bench, the 2 women began to plan. They talked about the children's personalities, their interests, their routines. Eleanor listened with hungry attention, as Sarah described Emma's love of art and storytelling, James's fascination with science and building things. She learned about their favorite foods, their bedtime rituals, their friends at school. Emma loves getting mail, Sarah mentioned. She checks the mailbox every day hoping for something addressed to her, even though she knows most of it will be bills and advertisements. She gets so excited when she receives birthday cards or postcards from Patricia's sister in California. Eleanor's eyes lit up. Perhaps I could send her something small. A postcard, maybe, or a small gift. Nothing that would require explanation, just something to let her know someone is thinking about her. They discussed the timing carefully. David and Patricia were due back from their business trip the following evening, which would give Eleanor and Sarah a day to think through their approach. Sarah would gauge David's mood and look for an appropriate opportunity to mention her encounter with Eleanor. As they prepared to part ways, Eleanor grasped Sarah's hands in both of hers. "I can't thank you enough, dear," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Not just for accepting my help with the groceries, but for giving me hope that I might be able to reconnect with my family. You've given me the most precious gift imaginable, the possibility of knowing my grandchildren." Sarah squeezed Eleanor's hands in return. "And you've given me something precious too, Eleanor. You've reminded me that kindness between strangers can change everything. And you've shown me that families are worth fighting for, even when it's difficult." They exchanged phone numbers and agreed to talk the following day after Sarah had a chance to assess the situation at home. As they walked to their respective cars, both women felt a sense of anticipation mixed with nervousness. Neither could have predicted when they woke up that morning that a simple trip to the grocery store would set in motion events that would reshape their entire understanding of family, forgiveness, and the power of unexpected connections. The Morrison house on Elm Ridge was exactly as Eleanor had described it, though Sarah had never really paid attention to its grandeur from the perspective of a family outsider. It was a large colonial with white columns, perfectly manicured landscaping, and windows that glowed warmly in the evening light. But as Sarah carried her groceries up the front steps, she found herself seeing it through Eleanor's eyes, imagining what it must feel like to drive past your son's house and know you weren't welcome inside. Inside, Emma and James were in the living room, building an elaborate castle out of wooden blocks, while a nature documentary played softly on the television. They looked up as Sarah entered, their faces brightening at the sight of the grocery bags. "Miss Sarah!" Emma called out, using the formal address David and Patricia had taught their children to use with household staff. "Did you remember the strawberry yogurt?" "I did indeed," Sarah replied, ruffling Emma's blonde hair. "And I got those whole grain crackers that James likes with his cheese." James, who was methodically arranging blocks by size and color, looked up with interest. "Can we have a snack now?" "Building makes me hungry." As Sarah prepared their snack in the kitchen, she found herself studying the children with new eyes. Emma did indeed look remarkably like the photos she had seen of David as a child, with the same blonde hair and bright blue eyes. James had inherited more of Patricia's darker coloring, but his serious expression and careful way of approaching tasks reminded Sarah strongly of what Eleanor had told her about David's personality as a child. "Miss Sarah," Emma said as she carefully dipped a cracker into her yogurt, "when are Mommy and Daddy coming home?" "Tomorrow evening, sweetheart. Their plane should land around dinner time, and they'll be home to tuck you in." Emma nodded, but Sarah could see the slight sadness in her eyes. 3 weeks was a long time for a 5-year-old, even when she was being cared for by someone she trusted and loved. "Miss Sarah," James said thoughtfully, "do you think Mommy and Daddy miss us when they're gone?" The question hit Sarah harder than usual, knowing what she now knew about Eleanor's separation from this family. "Oh, James, I know they miss you terribly. They love you both so much, and I'm sure they think about you every single day." "Then why do they go away so much?" Emma asked, the question that Sarah had wondered about herself but would never voice. Sarah chose her words carefully. "Well, your parents work very hard to make sure you have everything you need. Sometimes that means they have to travel to other places to do their jobs, but every time they go away, they're thinking about coming home to you." James considered this seriously. "I wish we had more family that lived closer. Like Tommy at school, he has grandparents who pick him up sometimes and take him for ice cream." Sarah's heart raced. This was exactly the opening she had been hoping for, but she hadn't expected it to come so naturally. "You do have other family, James. You have a grandmother on your daddy's side who lives here in town." Both children looked up with interest. "We do?" Emma asked. "Where is she? Why doesn't she come visit us?" Sarah felt the weight of the conversation, knowing she was entering delicate territory. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements that keep them apart for a while, but that doesn't mean they don't love each other. "Is that why we've never met Daddy's mommy?" James asked, with the direct way children often cut straight to the heart of matters. I think that might be part of it, Sarah said gently, but I also think that sometimes people just need help figuring out how to say they're sorry and start over. Emma's eyes lit up with the possibility. Could we help them? Could we help Daddy and his mommy be friends again? Sarah smiled at Emma's immediate desire to fix things, a trait she had noticed in the little girl before. Emma was always trying to help injured birds in the yard, comfort crying babies at the park, or find lost toys for other children. Maybe we could, Sarah said carefully. But it would have to be something we talked to your parents about first. We would need to make sure everyone was ready to try being a family again. That evening, after the children were asleep, Sarah sat in her small room adjacent to the main house and called, "Eleanor!" The elderly woman answered on the first ring as if she had been waiting by the phone. "Sarah, dear, how did everything go today?" Sarah filled Eleanor in on her conversation with the children, describing their natural curiosity about their extended family and their immediate desire to help bring people together. "They sound like wonderful children," Eleanor said, her voice full of longing, caring and thoughtful, just like their father was at that age. "They are wonderful," Sarah agreed. "But Eleanor, I think you should know that they do feel the absence of extended family. They notice that other children have grandparents who are active in their lives, and they wonder why they don't have that." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "That breaks my heart, Sarah. I've been so focused on my own hurt feelings that I never really considered how my absence might affect them. Children shouldn't have to pay the price for adult stubbornness." They talked through several possible approaches for reconnecting with David and the family. Eleanor was adamant that she didn't want to ambush David or put him in an uncomfortable position, but she was also determined not to let more time pass without at least attempting to bridge the gap. "I've been thinking," Eleanor said, "about what you mentioned regarding Emma's love of receiving mail. What if I sent her a small package, nothing elaborate, just a children's book, and a note saying it was from her grandmother who lives in town? If David becomes angry about it, I'll take full responsibility and explain that I arranged it without your knowledge." Sarah considered this. That might work. Emma would be so excited to receive something, and it would give David a chance to decide how he wants to handle the situation without feeling pressured to make an immediate decision. They agreed on this plan, with Eleanor promising to keep the initial contact simple and non-threatening. She would send a package to Emma with a beautiful children's book about a little girl who goes on adventures with her grandmother, along with a short note introducing herself as Grandma Eleanor, and mentioning that she lived nearby and thought of Emma often. The next day passed slowly for both women. Eleanor spent hours at the bookstore, carefully selecting a book she hoped Emma would love. She chose a story about a grandmother and granddaughter who solved mysteries together, with beautiful illustrations and a message about family bonds transcending time and distance. Sarah went about her normal routine with the children, but found herself watching the clock and anticipating David and Patricia's return with more nervousness than usual. She had always had a good relationship with her employers, but she had never been involved in anything as potentially volatile as reuniting estranged family members. When David and Patricia finally arrived home that evening, they looked exhausted but happy to be back. Emma and James launched themselves at their parents with the enthusiasm only children can muster, chattering excitedly about everything that had happened while they were away. "Miss Sarah took such good care of us," Emma announced. "And she made that soup you like, Daddy, and she helped me with my art project for school." David smiled at Sarah over his daughter's head. "Thank you, Sarah. I hope they behaved themselves." "They were perfect, as always," Sarah replied, "though they did miss you both terribly." As the family settled in for their first evening back together, Sarah noticed the easy affection between parents and children, but also the slight distance that always seemed to exist after David and Patricia had been traveling. It took a day or two for everyone to readjust to being together again, and Sarah could see the children working harder than usual to capture and hold their parents' attention. Later that evening, after the children were in bed, Patricia approached Sarah in the kitchen. "Sarah, I wanted to thank you again for everything you do for our family. I know it's not easy being responsible for the children for such long stretches, especially when our travel schedule is so unpredictable." Sarah seized the opportunity. "Mrs. Morrison, can I ask you something? Emma and James sometimes talk about wanting more family in their lives, especially grandparents. I know family situations can be complicated, but I wondered if you had ever considered whether there might be ways to expand their circle of people who love them." Patricia's expression grew guarded. "Are you referring to David's mother?" Sarah nodded carefully. I don't know the details of what happened between them, and it's certainly not my place to interfere. But the children do ask questions sometimes, and I can see that they feel the absence of extended family." Patricia sighed deeply. "It's complicated, Sarah. David and his mother had a serious falling out several years ago, and neither of them seems willing to make the first move toward reconciliation. I've tried to encourage David to reach out, especially for the children's sake, but he's incredibly stubborn when he feels he's been wronged." "What about you?" Sarah asked gently. "Did you have a relationship with Eleanor before the estrangement?" Patricia's expression softened slightly. "I did, actually. Eleanor was always kind to me, even when David and I were just dating. She never made me feel like I wasn't good enough for her son, which I appreciated because David's family has always been quite well off, and I came from much more modest circumstances." She paused, seeming to consider something. "I've always felt bad about the children not knowing her. Eleanor would have been a wonderful grandmother, I think. She was so good with children when David and I were first married, always asking when we were going to start a family, not in a pushy way, but because she was genuinely excited about the prospect of grandchildren." Sarah felt a surge of hope. "Mrs. Morrison, what if there was a way to start small, to test the waters without putting anyone in an uncomfortable position?" Before Patricia could respond, David appeared in the kitchen doorway, loosening his tie after the long flight home. "What are you two discussing so seriously?" he asked, moving to the refrigerator for a bottle of water. Patricia and Sarah exchanged glances. Patricia took a deep breath. "We were talking about the children and their questions about extended family, specifically about your mother." David's expression immediately darkened. "Patricia, we've discussed this. I'm not interested in reopening old wounds or subjecting our children to the kind of emotional manipulation I experienced growing up." Sarah felt compelled to speak up, despite knowing she was entering dangerous territory. "Mr. Morrison, with respect, I don't think the children see it as manipulation. They see it as a missing piece of their family puzzle. Emma especially asks questions about your mother, about why they've never met their other grandmother." David set down his water bottle harder than necessary. "Sarah, I appreciate your concern for our children, but family dynamics are complex, and there are things you don't understand about my relationship with my mother." "You're right," Sarah said quietly. "I don't understand all the complexities, but I do understand that Emma and James are growing up feeling like they're missing something that other children have. And sometimes, as an outsider, I can see things that people who are too close to the situation might miss." David was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could see the internal struggle playing out across his face. Patricia reached over and took his hand. "David, honey, maybe Sarah has a point. Maybe it's time to consider whether our pride is worth more than our children's relationship with their grandmother." Just then, the conversation was interrupted by the sound of the front doorbell. All three adults looked at each other in confusion, as it was nearly 9 o'clock and they weren't expecting anyone. David went to answer the door, returning a moment later with a package addressed to Emma Morrison. There was no return address, just a local postmark. "That's strange," Patricia said. "Who would be sending Emma a package?" Sarah's heart began to race, realizing that Eleanor must have decided to send the books sooner than they had planned. She watched nervously as David examined the package. "Maybe we should wait until morning to open it," Patricia suggested. "Emma will be so excited, and she's already asleep." But David was already carefully opening the package, his lawyer's instincts making him cautious about unexpected deliveries to his home. Inside was the beautiful children's book Eleanor had selected, along with a simple white envelope addressed to, "My dear granddaughter Emma." David's face went completely pale as he recognized his mother's handwriting. He opened the envelope with shaking hands and read the short note aloud. "My dearest Emma, I am your grandma Eleanor, your daddy's mother. I live here in town and think about you and your brother James every single day. I hope you will enjoy this book about grandmothers and granddaughters who have adventures together. Maybe someday we can have our own adventures. With all my love, Grandma Eleanor." The kitchen fell completely silent. Patricia covered her mouth with her hands, and Sarah stood frozen, uncertain whether she should explain her role in this development or wait to see how David would react. David read the note again, then looked at the book, which was indeed beautifully illustrated and clearly chosen with care and thought for a 5-year-old girl. "How did she know Emma's name?" he asked quietly. How did she know we lived here? Sarah realized she had to speak up. Mr. Morrison, I need to tell you something. I met your mother yesterday at the grocery store. David's head snapped up, his eyes sharp and focused on Sarah. You what? Sarah took a deep breath and explained the entire encounter, from Eleanor's kindness in paying for her groceries to their conversation about the estrangement, to Eleanor's desperate desire to know her grandchildren. She didn't seek me out, Sarah said quickly. It was completely coincidental. She was just being kind to a stranger who was short on money, and only afterward did we realize the connection. David sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the book still in his hands. 5 years, he said quietly. 5 years she's known she had grandchildren living 10 minutes away, and she never once tried to reach out. But David, Patricia said gently, according to Sarah, she was respecting the boundaries you set. She was waiting for you to make the first move. David looked up at his wife. And I was waiting for her to make the first move. I was waiting for her to apologize, to admit she was wrong about how we chose to live our lives. Sarah hesitated, then decided to share more of what Eleanor had told her. Mr. Morrison, your mother is 74 years old. She told me that she's regretted the argument between you every single day for 5 years. She said she's missed watching Emma and James grow up, and that she's been too proud and too afraid to reach out because she didn't know if you would want her in their lives. David was quiet for a long time, turning the book over in his hands. Finally, he spoke. She used to read to me every night when I was small. Even when she was exhausted from work, even when I was being difficult, she would sit on the edge of my bed and read until I fell asleep. Patricia smiled softly. She sounds like she would be a wonderful grandmother. David looked at Sarah. What did you think of her? Your honest impression? Sarah considered her words carefully. I thought she was elegant and kind, but also very sad. There was something about her that reminded me of Emma, actually. A sort of gentle strength, and a genuine concern for other people. She paid for my groceries without expecting anything in return, and only afterward, when she learned who I worked for, did she ask if I might be willing to help her reconnect with your family. David stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the well-lit street where he had grown up, where his mother still lived just a few miles away. I've driven past her house, he admitted quietly. More times than I care to admit. I always slow down when I pass, wondering if she's home, if she ever thinks about us. David, Patricia said softly, what if we started small? What if we let the children meet her in a neutral setting, just to see how everyone feels? Sarah felt compelled to add, she specifically said she didn't want to overstep or make anyone uncomfortable. She just wants a chance to be part of Emma and James's lives, even in a small way. David turned back to face them, and Sarah could see that something had shifted in his expression. The anger and defensiveness were still there, but they were tempered now by something else. Love for his children, perhaps, or simply exhaustion from carrying a grudge for so long. If we did this, he said slowly, it would have to be on our terms. I won't have her criticizing our choices or undermining our parenting. Patricia nodded eagerly. Of course, we would set clear boundaries from the beginning. Sarah felt a surge of hope and relief. Should I contact her? Let her know that you're willing to consider a meeting? David looked at the book again, at the careful way Eleanor had chosen something appropriate and beautiful for his daughter. Tell her, he said finally, that we would be willing to meet for coffee. Somewhere public, somewhere the children would feel comfortable. And tell her that this is a chance to start over, not to relitigate the past. As Sarah prepared to make the phone call that would begin the process of reuniting a family that had been separated by pride and misunderstanding, she reflected on the unexpected ways that kindness could ripple outward. Eleanor's simple gesture of paying for groceries had revealed connections none of them had anticipated, and had opened the door to healing relationships that had seemed irreparably broken. The meeting was arranged for the following Saturday at a small cafe in the town center that had a children's play area and was known for being family-friendly. Eleanor arrived 20 minutes early, her hands trembling slightly as she ordered a cup of tea and chose a table near the window where she could watch for David's family. She had spent the entire week preparing for this moment, choosing her outfit carefully, practicing what she might say, trying to imagine how her grandchildren might look and sound and behave. Sarah had given her some guidance about Emma's love of art and James's scientific curiosity. But Eleanor knew that no amount of preparation could really ready her for the reality of meeting these children who carried her blood but were essentially strangers. When the Morrison family finally arrived, Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Emma was even more beautiful than she had imagined, with David's blonde hair and bright blue eyes, chattering animatedly to her parents as they walked through the cafe door. James walked more sedately beside his father, but Eleanor could see intelligence and curiosity in his serious expression. David spotted her immediately, and Eleanor could see him take a deep breath before approaching her table. Patricia followed behind, holding Emma's hand, while James walked close to his father's side. "Mother," David said quietly, his voice carefully neutral. "Hello, David," Eleanor replied, standing slowly. "Patricia. And these must be Emma and James." Emma looked up at her grandmother with open curiosity, while James hung back slightly, observing this new person with careful attention. "Are you really our daddy's mommy?" Emma asked directly, in the way children often cut straight to the heart of matters. Eleanor smiled, kneeling down to Emma's level despite the protest from her arthritis. "I am indeed, which makes me your grandmother. You can call me Grandma Eleanor if you'd like." Emma considered this seriously. "Thank you for the book. It's very pretty, and Miss Sarah read it to us 3 times already." "I'm so glad you enjoyed it," Eleanor said, glancing up at Sarah, who had accompanied the family and was standing slightly apart from the group. James stepped forward then, his scientific mind clearly working through the family connections. "If you're Daddy's mother, then you're our grandmother. But why haven't we met you before?" The directness of the question hung in the air, and Eleanor looked up at David, unsure how to answer without reopening old wounds. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.